There are secrets that are not born from a desire to deceive, but from fear of losing everything. Too Deep's secret was one of them. For years, she carried it the way one carries a poorly healed wound, covered by smiles, routines, and carefully placed silences. She believed time would do the work for her. That if she waited long enough, the truth would fade, soften, or lose its power. But time does not always heal. Sometimes, it simply prepares the stage, so that when the truth finally falls, it does so with greater force. And when it happened, it was not private, it was not controlled. It was not gentle. It happened abruptly, in front of people who should never have heard it, at a moment when there was no turning back. Part 1. The moment the truth escaped Too Deep had always believed that protecting others justified any silence. Protecting little Nhi. Protecting James. Protecting even herself, from a past that had shaped her more deeply than she was willing to admit. But the day the secret came to light, she understood something she had long avoided. Some truths refuse to remain hidden forever. It took only one sentence, spoken in the wrong tone, one look that connected fragments that had never quite aligned before. Suddenly, everything that had lived in the shadows became unbearably visible. There were no raised voices. The impact was not immediate. No dramatic scenes. What hurt most was the silence that followed, the hollow space where every person present began to reinterpret the past with new eyes. James felt it first. Memories they had shared quietly shifted in meaning, as if someone had rewritten the emotional subtitles of their life together. Every gesture, every promise, every moment of tenderness now carried an unspoken question. But now it stood surrounded by doubt. The love was still there, and doubt, when left unanswered, weighs more than most people imagine. For Too Deep, the cost began to reveal itself in details so small they were almost invisible. A conversation that ended too soon. A distance that could not quite be named, the constant feeling of being watched, not as the woman she was. Like so many before her, she wondered whether telling the truth earlier would have changed anything. But as the sum of her past mistakes, or whether it would have only accelerated the same ending. Because there are secrets that, once revealed, do not merely destroy an image, they shatter the fragile illusion of control we believe we have over our lives. This story is not only about Too Deep and her secret. It is about all of us. About the truths we postpone, the decisions we make in silence, and the invisible price we pay while we wait. Because when the truth finally asserts itself, it does not ask whether we are ready. It simply demands to be heard, and in that moment, each person must decide what they are willing to lose, and what might still be worth saving. Part 2. When consequences become real. The second chapter began when the consequences of the secret stopped being abstract and became painfully real. It was no longer about awkward silences or sidelong glances, it was about choices that demanded to be made. James tried to continue with his daily life, but every routine gesture, making coffee in the morning, checking his phone before sleep, was pierced by a persistent question: how much of what he had lived with Too Deep was true? As he had understood it, Too Deep, meanwhile, carried a double guilt, and the guilt of having allowed it to surface in such a cruel way. The guilt of having hidden the truth, not that place. She had not planned that moment. Not those witnesses, yet she knew she could no longer hide behind the role of circumstance. And now, so was the responsibility of facing what came next. The secret had been hers. Their conversation slowed. Words were chosen with care, as though each one carried the power to break something beyond repair. Sometimes they talked for hours and reached no conclusion. Other times, emotional exhaustion left them silent, staring at the same empty point. Sharing a sadness neither knew how to name. It was during those moments that James realized something painful. Love does not always break because of a lie, but because of the feeling of having been excluded from the truth. People who had once been silent now offered opinions, judgments, allegiances. The outside world began to react. Some defended Too Deep, arguing that everyone has a right to a past and to decide when to confront it. Others saw the secret as an unforgivable betrayal. That external pressure added another layer of strain. It forced both of them to confront not only their own emotions, but the expectations of others. Amid the chaos, Too Deep began to ask herself what it truly meant to pay the price of truth. Was it losing James? Was it accepting a version of herself forever marked by the revealed secret? Or was it learning to look at herself without fear, even if that meant being alone for a while? There were no clear answers. But one truth emerged unmistakably. Running away was no longer an option. Part 3, Distance, Memory, and the first honest conversation. The third part opened with a deceptive calm, the kind that often appears just before emotions overflow again. After days of tension and unanswered questions, James chose to take distance, not as punishment, but as a clumsy attempt to organize what he felt. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of memories, unspoken promises, and a fragile hope neither dared to voice aloud. Too Deep felt that distance like a slow wound. There were no direct accusations, but James's absence weighed more heavily than any argument. In her solitude, she revisited the moments when she had chosen silence, convinced that protecting others justified hiding herself. Now she understood that the price of that silence was not only present pain, but the erosion of trust she had worked so hard to build. Seeking not to break, Too Deep returned to the places that had shaped her, the modest house of her childhood. The streets where she learned to endure without explanation, the voices of the past that reminded her who she was before she became someone who ran. There, she understood something essential. The secret did not define her entire life. And loving from fear always leaves scars. But it had shaped the way she loved. James, meanwhile, fought his own internal conflict. Part of him wanted to return, to hold her and say everything could be overcome. Another part, more wounded, demanded protection, an end to repeating old patterns of disappointment. He realized his pain came not only from the revealed truth, but from feeling excluded from a fundamental chapter of the woman he loved. Like many before him, he discovered that he feared not so much her past, but the idea that he had not been worthy of knowing it sooner. No speeches. Their reunion came unexpectedly. No dramatic scenes. Just a simple conversation, almost ordinary, yet charged with a sincerity that had not existed before. She spoke from vulnerability, acknowledging that fear had guided her for too long. Too Deep did not justify herself. For the first time, he understood that she was no longer hiding anything. James listened without interrupting. This part of the story resonates deeply because it captures that moment when we must choose whether to remain defined by our mistakes, or to grow from them. There are no guarantees of happy endings, but there is one certainty: facing the truth honestly transforms us, even when it hurts. Part 4. Choosing to stay without certainty. The fourth part begins when the weight of truth shifts, from an open wound to a sensitive scar. After that honest conversation, nothing returned to how it was before, but neither did it remain frozen in pain. They moved into unfamiliar territory, where every word carried more weight and every silence demanded attention. Such is life when something breaks and we choose not to flee. Too Deep began to change, quietly, firmly. She no longer avoided questions or lowered her gaze when the past surfaced in everyday conversation. She understood now that truth not only frees, it also holds us accountable. She allowed herself, finally, to occupy her place in the world without apologizing for existing. James underwent a less visible but equally intense process. Listening did not mean instant understanding. Empathy and fear coexisted within him, love and doubt sharing the same space. Some nights, he wondered whether he could look at Too Deep without the past standing between them. Other nights, he reproached himself for having expected an idealized version of someone who was. That internal conflict forced him to confront his own fragility. In the end, simply human. The environment continued to react, glances, whispered opinions, unsolicited judgments. But for the first time, Too Deep did not retreat. She had learned that hiding only feeds judgment. Showing oneself, even when it hurts, is an act of courage. The turning point came with a decision neither had planned. James, tired of doubting in silence, chose to stay, not because everything was resolved, but because he understood that real love is not born from absolute certainty, but from the willingness to walk together even when the ground trembles. It was human, imperfect, and deeply honest. It was not a grand gesture. This part invites reflection. How often do we demand transparency without being ready to accept what comes with it? How often do we ask for truth, only if it does not unsettle us? The story reminds us that growing means relinquishing the comfort of half-truths and embracing the risk of loving with open eyes. Part 5. After the storm, a different kind of calm. The final part opens with another deceptive calm, the stillness that follows a storm when the heart still beats fast but the sky appears clear. Too Deep woke one morning with the sense that something inside her had permanently shifted. It was acceptance, quiet, mature. Not happiness. It was not relief. He no longer sought immediate answers or perfect explanations. James observed the change in silence. He had learned that some truths are not solved like puzzles, but absorbed over time, through shared days, small gestures, and the absence of demands. Sometimes, walking together without speaking felt more honest than any promise spoken aloud. It returned in memories, in the looks of others, in unexpected moments. The past did not disappear. But Too Deep no longer feared it as before. She understood that carrying her history did not condemn her to repeat it. James, too, reached his own realization. Loving does not mean saving the other or demanding emotional purity. It means accompanying without erasing, supporting without controlling. The true cost of the revealed secret was not the initial pain, but the responsibility of choosing what to do with the truth once known. Some people left. Life continued, indifferent, constant. Others approached with a newfound sincerity. Between routines and meaningful decisions, Too Deep and James began to build something different, not a perfect relationship. The story does not end with absolutes or eternal promises, but a conscious one. Only with two people learning to rebuild, understanding that the price of truth can be high, but living without it costs far more.